Hi everybody, this is my overview on Milestone 3, Creating Connections. This is your last milestone before your final project is due in Module 7. And really it's a connection to Milestone 2. Hi everybody, this is my overview on Milestone 3, Creating Connections. This assignment is due this week. And just like Milestone 2, this is very important because I'm going to provide you some substantial feedback as this is the last milestone before your final project is due in Module 7. So I hope this is helpful. So Milestone 2, you actually created the concept map. This is really a time where you brainstormed and really kind of looked in, researched a little bit about your issue, and sort of brainstormed what it might look like overall, right? What the bigger picture was. This milestone 3, is an extension of Milestone 2 in that you really now want to create connections and get a little bit more granular or flesh this out or provide a little bit more detail if you hadn't done so already, in that you want to really kind of hone in on research and expand from your general statements that you may have made in Milestone 2 and really expand upon that in Milestone 3. So what does this look like? This is your Milestone 3 guidelines and rubric document, and so I thought I would highlight a few things. First, in the beginning it says, now that you have broken down the social issue into smaller pieces in the concept map, you will explain the connections you made and how these connections will help you better understand the issue. So that's overall pretty important to remember. And so as we move forward and we talk about the rubric, this will make a little bit more sense. Also, it's really your time to showcase that you know the sociological concepts that you've learned in the course from your readings, from the announcements, right? So it's really to demonstrate the value of using a sociological view when examining social issues. So we want to stay clear from making general statements or sharing personal experiences, but really hone in on or really focus in on specific research, scholarly research, and use sociological concepts that we've learned in this course through your readings. And then here is the prompt. So here are those 4 categories: cultural, social roles, social inequalities, and the impact of social change. And I'll break those down a little bit more as we move forward. So let's first talk about cultural. Using my example of domestic violence, I thought I would highlight each one of these, right? So in your prompt, in the cultural biases or beliefs and biases, it says, describe the relationship between the cultural beliefs and biases identified in the map and the social issue, and provide specific examples to support your description. For example, you might describe how the relationship is positive, negative, or strained. So here you really want to let's talk about, first of all, my example here. So domestic violence. Cultural beliefs and biases, number 1, men are never victims of domestic violence. And number 2, domestic violence typically happens in poor families. So you really want to focus in on this, right? These are the misconceptions that the general public think about this issue, and really try to look into research-wise what is out there to counteract those misconceptions or those myths attached to your social issue. And you want to talk about the relationship between these beliefs and biases, or these myths or misconceptions, in relation to your social issues. So in those cases, in relation to domestic violence. And explain how the cultural beliefs and biases identified in the map help you better understand the social issue, right? So it really kind of helps us, these 2 sort of misconceptions, we have research out there that tells us otherwise. And so what does that mean in terms of better understanding the issue moving forward? You can also draw connections between the other bubbles, right? So with the number 1, men are never victims of domestic violence, you can correlate this to your social role or victim, right? We always think that men are never victims. There's a clear connection there, not only a language connection, but definitely a conceptual connection, in that we can talk about the social roles of victim and batterer or perpetrator in relation to our misconception or belief that men are never victims. We can connect it to the batterer or perpetrator, like I had said, or even connect it to domestic violence typically happens in poor families. That's number 2. We can connect that to lack of services. We know that in our nation we have very little domestic violence services for the type of problem that we have. It's a huge problem in the United States, and so we really just don't have the services equipped to deal with the problem overall, and so we can kind of relate those together. Let's talk about social roles. All right, so in the case of domestic violence, we have victim and batterer and perpetrator. So in the prompt says, describe the relationship between the social roles identified in the map and the social issue, and provide specific examples to support your description. For example, you might describe how the relationship is positive, negative, or strained. In your response, you might consider what expectations are in place because of the social roles. That last sentence saying you might consider, this is just something to consider. I would also point out that you're going to notice in the prompt that it's saying, think about the relationship, whether it's positive, negative, or strained. I would say that because we're dealing with social issues or social problems here, that most likely the relationships between not only the social roles, but the social inequalities, the beliefs and biases, all of that in relation to the social issue is either going to be negative or strained, right? Because we are really dealing with problems in our society. And so to me, unless, I would love to see an example of something positive, right? Maybe even at the end when we talk about social change, but most likely you're going to see that positive, negative, that negative strained relationship. And explain how the social roles identified in the map help you better understand the social issue. This number 2 is in every single one of your categories. So you're going to really want to make sure you talk about this, especially using sociological concepts. That's a big thing, right? Again, you can also connect the bubbles to one another. So talking about the relationship with, in this example, batterer and the perpetrator and victim, that the fact that domestic violence occurs within the context of families and usually around people who are in intimate partner relationships, right? That's the whole idea of domestic violence. And so talking about that relationship between victim and batterer or the perpetrator. We can even talk about, we made this connection earlier about men are never victims of domestic violence, and connect that to the social roles of victims. We talked about that when we talked about cultural beliefs and biases. Again, there's that connection. We could also connect social roles number 1, victim, to the existing social conditions, that on a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed at domestic violence hotlines nationwide. These are phone calls made by victims who need help, who need guidance. And so we can connect that together, right? There's a relationship there. And then also with the victim and the other social condition number 1. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States during 1 year. This equates to more than 10 million women and men in the United States. And so that overall, you can make those connections there as well. And then finally, you can make a connection with this social role victim to gender inequality, to what I identified as a social inequality related to the social issue. In that victims are predominantly, again, men can be victims, right? But victims are predominantly women and girls. And so we can talk about that gender inequality. So before I move forward in the other topics, I just want to be clear that really your milestone 2 was a time to brainstorm and put down your thoughts, right? And whether or not you put in statistics, that's wonderful. Really kind of focused in on your issue. But this milestone, however, is really a time to draw those connections and to bring in that research, right? And to really stay clear about making personal statements or overall generalizations, but really focus in on the research. Social inequalities. So for me, I put lack of services and gender inequality. So the prompt says, describe the relationship between the social inequalities identified in the map and the social issue. How are the social inequalities present in the issue? So we just really, again, want to get a little bit more granular, a little bit more detailed here. And talk about number 2, explain how the social inequalities identified in the map help you better understand the issue. Okay, and you want to put in specific examples as well. So let's draw some connections to the other bubbles. Lack of services. We did this when we talked about cultural beliefs and biases, that, domestic violence typically happens in poor communities. Perhaps there's a connection between lack of services there. Or lack of services on a typical day, 20,000 phone calls are placed to the domestic violence hotline. That's a lot. I don't think we have enough services for that kind of call volume. And then also gender inequality. We made this connection when we talked about cultural biases, and men are never victims. So there's definitely some overlap. There's definitely some connections there. There's connections among the whole thing, right? And then finally, the impact of social change. So this really is connected to your existing social condition 1 and 2. This is where I put my stats, where a lot of you put your statistics as well. Here, we want to do something a little bit different. So we want to describe how the social issue is challenging the existing state or conditions, providing specific examples. So you always want to provide examples. We'll talk about that when we talk about the rubric. But we want to really not only highlight the existing condition in society, but we want to talk about that in relation to the social issue and how the social issue is making it, how it's really kind of sort of out there in society, right? How it's a problem in society, how existing our social condition, and how it's really challenging the existing state or conditions. And then 2, this is going to be different. How might the social issue facilitate change for the existing state or conditions? Provide specific examples. So now you're sort of at the end of your synopsis, right? At the end of your paper. And this is where you really want to talk about or focus in on what needs to change. What sorts of things do we need to do as a society, again, using sociological concepts from your reading and from what you learned in the course, and not, necessarily making overall personal statements, but what sorts of things do we need to do to change this, to change the existing state or condition in our society? Organizing your thoughts in your paper. So what does this mean? I might have confused you a little bit by showing you all of those connections with all the sorts of bubbles, but I kind of want to just focus in on how you can organize your thoughts in your actual paper itself so you don't feel super overwhelmed. So first, what I imagine happening, now you don't have to do this is just a suggestion. What I imagine happening is you talking first about the cultural beliefs and biases, the misconceptions attached to the social issue itself. So that this is how we're going to sort of start our paper off, right? This is where we're going to start our paper off. And then perhaps we talk about the real life, the real reality of that. Not only do you want to talk about the misconceptions, the beliefs and biases attached to this social issue, but you actually might even want to counteract that, right, with some real research, with some real stats. And maybe this is where your existing social condition comes in. Maybe this is where you can connect the two together, right? That men are never victims of domestic violence. Well, this is where you might want to actually put in a statistic on the fact that men are victims and put in, well, women are predominantly more likely to be victims than men. Men are in fact victims, and here are the statistics. Here's what we know about men being victims of domestic violence. So that's how you might want to organize that. And then social roles, we want to talk about the batterer, victim. We want to kind of hone in on or focus in on the social roles attached to the issue itself. Again, you don't have to follow this guideline, but it might be helpful. And then finally, you want to talk about the social inequalities attached to the social issues. So gender inequality, lack of services. And you kind of actually want to maybe circle back to what sorts of things need to be changed in order to address the social issue, like what was asked of you in the existing social condition and social change and all that other stuff. So that being said, that's just an example on how you can organize your thoughts, how it might logically work. You want to make sure that you actually label your paper so that you have the headings of cultural beliefs and biases, social rules, existing social conditions, social inequalities. You want to be sure that you sort of label your paper but you don't necessarily have to go in order. Just make sure there's some type of organization to that. And then finally, we're at the rubric stage, right? We always have to go back to the rubric because this is what I use to grade. First, I would say this milestone must be a minimum of 1 page in length. Given what I just said, my guess is it's going to be a lot longer than 1 page in length, but at minimum, it needs to be 1 page, right? And you want to submit your concept map from Module 4, so what you did last module, or your Milestone 2, with this description. So make sure you have both your map and as well as this description. Again, the map is just simple, couple words, what you did in Milestone 2. This milestone is an extension of that, where you're really focusing in on and really going to use research and really going to state your case here and show me that you know sociological concepts, all while using the concepts that you've learned in the course from your readings and discussion boards and announcements. So let's start with the proficient. Creating connections, cultural beliefs, and biases. That's our critical element. So describes the relationship between cultural beliefs and biases in the map and the social issue, providing specific examples and using knowledge from the course. You're going to see if you go down this column, using knowledge from the course, providing specific examples using knowledge from the course, So again, you want to stay away from making those overall generalizations, just sort of when you're having a conversation with a friend, we don't want to put that type of language or that type of conversation in an academic paper. We want to back it up with academic research. And so we want to use specific examples using knowledge from the course. So show me that you know certain things and concepts from the course. Needs improvement. This should help kind of focus in on that as well. So describes the relationship between cultural beliefs and biases in the map and the social issue, but description has gaps in detail or accuracy, or does not use specific examples or knowledge from the course. All right, so you can see how that's really important. You don't just want to make statements, blanket overall general statements, but you really want to focus in on your statements, use examples from the course, show me that you know what you're talking about, use sociological concepts, use real scholarly academic research. And you're going to see when you go down that column, that is the case for every single critical element. There's explanation, gaps, or detail, or accuracy, and you do not use knowledge from the course, or you do not use specific examples. And then, of course, not evident is you didn't work on that critical element, and it's just not there. So good luck, everybody. This is your final milestone before your final project. I look forward to reading them all. I think you all did a great job on Milestone 2. I'm really looking forward to reading Milestone 3 and moving forward in the course. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.